Welcome to the Neurodiverse Lens, a CDL podcast featuring Carolyn and Jordan.
Welcome back to the Neurodiverse Lens, a CDL podcast. You're here today with myself. I'm Carolyn, and this is Jordan. And this podcast is a way that we can talk about issues related to neurodiversity from both a professional and a personal lens. Today, our topic is a highly requested one. It is the hidden toll of masking. And we're going to dive into those issues today, talking about it from both that professional and personal lens.
Today's episode is sponsored by Artemis Assessment and Treatment Center. They're located in Burlington and Windsor. And I just want to give a little shout out to their new mascot, Fidgety Squirrel. So you can watch all of their current episodes that are out on YouTube, on their website, Facebook, and Instagram. And it is Fidgety Squirrel and his friends navigate the fun and occasional frustration of life with ADHD and learning disabilities.
It is so cute.
So today's episode, we're going to be talking about the mental load of masking. So masking often becomes a survival tool for neurodiverse individuals, but it comes at a cost. In this episode, we're going to be exploring what masking is, how it affects identity and well-being, and what it means to unmask in safe, supportive spaces. So, Carolyn, how do you describe masking to someone who might be maybe unfamiliar with the term?
Yeah, so for me, masking is both the conscious and unconscious decisions that we make as neurodiverse individuals to better fit in a neurotypical world. This can be a whole range of behaviors. This can be from the way people talk. This can be not stimming. It can be replicating conversations. All of those pieces go into masking, and it can also be hiding your emotions. And I think we're going to talk a lot about that piece today as well.
Yeah, I think I see it kind of even within our workspace a lot of times, it kind of all sounds like we might be saying the same things sometimes, like either the same phrases, sentences, and stuff like that, when it comes to like maybe mimicking the social norms, even though we all, a lot of our coworkers and stuff are neurodiverse. I feel like there is some sort of still of a masking component when at the office, even though we are so open and honest about everything. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, there are days where I'm like, I'm really autistic today. And because we often talk about autism being a spectrum, which it is, but it also, my symptoms and how my autism is expressed can be deeply impacted by the amount of stress I'm under, how much sleep I got last night, if I'm nervous about something, if I've eaten, all of those pieces. And some days I'm more aware that I am expressing, often physically, my symptoms of autism. And it's nice to be in a workplace where I can do that and not have to do that extra labor of trying to hide those behaviors.
Yeah, it's always a good reminder too. I like when you're in the office with us because you always remind us to go eat lunch together. Because I know sometimes when I'm there with no other team members, it's like 3:30 and I still haven't ate yet because you haven't prompted us to, hey, take a break and sit in the lunchroom with me. But yeah, so a lot of times when it comes to masking, it might begin in childhood, but do you think it's always in childhood, or is it something that people just learn kind of over time? Or
it's both, and as I mentioned, that masking is both a conscious and unconscious choice. A lot of individuals, people like me who are diagnosed later in life, I was never intentionally masking. I was intentionally trying to fit in. I was intentionally trying to be, quote unquote, less weird. And for me, that started in childhood. As I've shared on other podcasts, I was bullied a lot. And I would often go home and I almost took it as like daily performance reviews. That's how I internalized my bullying. And I'd be like, okay, so tomorrow, no annoying humming. Remember not to talk while I'm eating. Don't rock when I get upset. Because that's something I've always done for childhood is I'll like naturally just, like it's not a full rock, but it's just this little like, and people pick up on it when I'm upset. Try to talk less with your hands. I have never successfully masked that level of stimming. I'm always talking with my hands. All of those things I would take and be like, okay, tomorrow I am going to do better. And that's a huge weight on a 9-year-old. And so those were conscious choices, but there's also been unconscious choices that I've made throughout my life. Trying to control the tone of my voice, trying to control the volume of my voice. All of those things come naturally in wanting to fit in.
Yeah. Is there anything that you can add maybe on like gendered masking experiences?
Yeah, and so this is, you know, one of the things I talk about a lot is how research into female autism is really kind of new, that autism was often looked at from that male lens. And what we do know is that young girls and often will socialize each other and they will more clearly articulate what the social rules are to each other and control the social dynamic. They're telling each other, be quiet, be nice, those pieces. We tend to see that behavior a little bit less in boys, and that boys aren't getting the same social scripting that girls will sometimes do to each other. And of course, it's not perfect on gendered lines. There are boy social groups that do the social scripting, but in general, we see a lot of social scripting with girls where they're telling other girls how to behave. I share a lot about this video I once watched of 2 groups of children. So what happens is these 2 groups of children spend all day with this very nice lady. That's the purpose. And they see how nice she is. She's nice and kind, and you can tell the children all fall in love with her. Then she goes, oh, I worked really hard to make you a dessert. I want to share it with you guys. So she makes Jell-O, but she makes it with salt.
Oh.
And she gives it to the young boys, and the boys take a bite. And even though she's eagerly watching them, like, you know how someone will, like, oh, tell me it's great.
Yeah.
She goes, oh, I hope you guys really like it, and gives it to them, and she's all full of hope. And the boys take a bite, and they're like, this is gross. And they all share how gross it is. And they don't, you know, try to help her feelings.
Right.
It's given to groups of girls, and the girls take a bite, and before any of them react, they all look at each other first. And there is almost this social contract of we're going to be nice. So one of the girls in, like, who would be deemed the leader of the group will go, this is good, and look at the other girls like this. If a girl was to say, ooh, this is gross, the other girls would look and go, no, it's fine, it's fine.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's just one video. That's obviously not cemented scientific proof, but this is an example of how that can be different. So even non-neurodiverse girls are facing some level of masking. And that's the other piece, that masking is thought of as a neurodiverse concept. It is something that everyone does. But I think why we're doing this video is to talk about that hidden weight that's constantly on neurodiverse individuals. Because I hear from the community a lot of times, well, I do that too. I have to think about what I say. Oh yeah, when I leave a social event, yeah, I think about what I said and that runs through my mind. I try to control my tone. I try to control my emotions. And they're saying that almost in a way to invalidate the more intense experience of constantly doing that as a neurodiverse individual. While at the same time, that neurodiverse individual and those neurodiverse children are receiving messages that their masking isn't good enough.
Yeah.
I think that's been the largest toll on me, is that no matter how hard I tried to mask, I wasn't going to pass as normal. Like, I would be the weird kid, you know? I had someone ask me, why do you think you were bullied as a child? And I said, because I was weird. Like, and so that was always a hidden weight on me, is that I wanted to socialize and fit in. And in trying my best, my absolute best, and I mean seriously, when I'm a 9-year-old child, I'm going home and I'm like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do better. I would run these lists in my head. I would be so determined to get it right the next day and then fail. And that weight of failing to fit in makes masking heavy. I wonder if masking would be less of a heavy weight if it, quote unquote, was successful all the time.
That's really interesting to think about. And honestly, I feel like as we've filmed so many episodes already together and just like listening to you talk, it's like I'm learning so much stuff about myself. And like, as someone who has always said I thought I was neurotypical, maybe I am not, but that is a conversation for another time. But it's just like interesting to see like but it's so true. Like the masking is so true when you're even for neurotypical people, because I feel as someone who's worked in childcare and with, kids in the school and everything for so long, you see it like, so many kids are just trying to fit in with others and, pretend they like the same things as others because one student who may be, the leader of the group likes this one thing and, they all want to follow kind of thing. But it's not talked about ever in a neurotypical setting, so it's obviously has that stigma around it. But I think, maybe if there was more open conversations about it, with like more neurotypical people, then I feel like maybe it wouldn't be as stigmatized. Could you speak to anything regarding like family expectations, whether it be, a single person or a person that's in a relationship, whether they have to deal with in-laws maybe or anything like that?
Yeah. One of the tough parts about being neurodiverse is you're not always, quote unquote, allowed to be the same level of neurodiverse in different experiences. Before we shot this episode, I was talking about an experience of someone who was coming to speak to me, and all they knew about me was that I was autistic. That's really all they knew, and how it affected how they walked into the room and how they viewed me. And that can also work in reverse, where, let's say in-laws, they don't know you, they don't know your diagnosis, and they do not understand why in the middle of dinner you had to get up to leave. Or like a level of masking, this is not often thought of masking, but it often happens. So there is a range of aversion. It can be all the way from ARFID, which is a clinical condition, to just not liking foods. I am a very picky eater. My husband will tease me that I have the palate of a 5-year-old. And I like foods I can trust. One of the biggest sources of anxiety is going to eat at someone else's house when they have cooked a meal. So a level of masking is I have to eat food that honestly disgusts me, or I can't stand the texture of, or I can't stand the smell of. Roast beef is, I can't. And one time when I was newly dating my husband, his father cooked roast beef and was like, no, you just haven't had my roast beef. And I had to eat it. And it's that choice of, do I offend these in-laws or do I mask? Or do I have to disclose and go through a whole conversation with people who might not know me enough yet? We talked about this in another episode of like when to disclose. This is the other piece of why masking can be such an exhausting thing, is I don't want to constantly have to be telling people I'm autistic to get my needs met.
Right.
And so sometimes I am just required to mask. And so I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I know a lot of neurotypical people watch this podcast. And if you're watching and going, how could I help a loved one in a family situation, is be an ally and say, it's okay, you don't need to eat that.
Yeah.
You can say things like that. Or if you notice that someone is struggling to socially engage with the family and people are going, why are you so quiet? Why don't you say anything? Be an ally and say, not everybody needs to talk as much as you, Aunt Janice. Like, you can do that for neurodiverse people. I think when we want to talk about the weight of unmasking, I really don't want that responsibility only on neurodiverse individuals. This needs to be a shared responsibility between neurotypical people and neurodiverse individuals to reduce the weight of masking. Because I don't mask for other neurodiverse people. I mean, as you know, at the office, that's not it. And I'm going to be honest, you guys have not fully seen me unmasked.
For sure.
You are still seeing a level of masking. You guys just get a pretty clear vision of me, but you don't get to see the full vision of me. I am masking for neurotypical people. And the question I don't have the answer to, am I masking for them or for me? And that makes me a little emotional. Am I masking to be accepted, or am I masking because I feel more comfortable when I fit in? And maybe it's not an either or answer.
Yeah.
But if we want to take this weight off neurodiverse individuals so that they can be better friends, better workers, better family members, better partners, better community members, better volunteers, because masking has a weight, and if we can take that weight away, people can shine. It can't just be neurodiverse individuals have to work through that mentally on their own. It's up to the neurotypical people around them to make a situation where they're comfortable being unmasked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of leads me into like the whole emotional toll of potentially like the impact of long-term masking on an individual's mental health. So like burnout, or that feeling of like disconnect from either yourself or from others. And then potentially, like barriers to getting a diagnosis if someone might be, masking so much, going back into that disconnect from their self, because if they don't know how to turn it off, they might feel that. But like, what could be potentially like the impact of that?
Yeah, one of the reasons I think masking leads to burnout is one of the phenomenons I've noticed is I do not get praised for the 99% of the time that I fully mask, I hold it in, and I do the things that help neurotypical people understand me and feel more comfortable around me and help me fit in. I get no praise for that. That is expected, despite the huge weight of that emotional labor. But I absolutely can get criticized, blamed, shamed for that 1% where I'm not able to mask, or the mask slips unintentionally. And that's a heavy weight to carry around. I need to perfectly mask in certain situations or face consequences. This isn't just like, oh, you're a better friend. There are consequences, especially in the workplace, for neurodiverse individuals who cannot mask 100% of the time. You are going to be blamed for that time it falls through. And that's a heavy weight to carry all the time. And even if that 1% of the time has never happened, you know that it might. The longer you get to know someone, the more you're in the workplace, the more it's likely to happen. I know times in my life that it happened to me, and it happened kind of recently where I had a moment and I was more emotional than I wanted to be. My tone wasn't what I wanted it to be, and it was just for a moment. I had days of deep feelings of shame. And that's coming from me, who preaches that I shouldn't feel shame and that
Right.
but it still got to me. And before filming this episode, you kind of knew a little bit about that, and you're like, do you want to film this episode today? We could do something else. And I was like, no, today is the day to talk about it, because this is real. And a lot of times we talk about the things you can do as a neurodiverse individual to better your life. And this episode's a little bit different, because as I'm talking about, this episode isn't on the neurodiverse individual. This episode is on the allies.
Yeah.
And it's, and I don't want anyone to think that there should be no accountability for my behavior, even if it's just that 1% of the time. It's that accountability needs to be tinged with compassion.
Right.
So if I have a rude tone with someone, no, it's not, oh, she's autistic, it's okay. It's the person can absolutely say, hey, I didn't like your tone. And I can say, I'm sorry. It was a weak moment for me. I hope you don't judge me long term, but I am sorry. It's not that it's a no accountability thing. That's not what we're asking. I think what the neurodiverse community is asking for is understanding that it is a heavy weight. Understanding that no matter how much we try, love you, are dedicated, and want to never make a mistake, never be over emotional, never have a quote unquote meltdown, that those things are real and can still happen, and that it's not that we don't want to be held accountable, it's just that we want to be understood and forgiven when we take accountability. And one of the barriers to taking accountability can often be that it isn't met with understanding. It's really hard to apologize and someone not take that apology. And I think so what we're asking, or I guess like no one made me queen of the neurodiverse community. Yeah. But to speak for my community, I think what we're asking is just some understanding that if a neurodiverse person has a moment where they're acting differently than how they usually act, to take consideration that that might be because they're having a weak moment, because they are tired, because they're over emotional, because something has been triggered. There's a huge association between neurodiversity and trauma, and you might have hit a trauma button not intentionally as an ally, but had that reaction.
Yeah, and honestly, that is a great segue into kind of, you know, our next topic, where we're talking about the importance of safe communities, safe environments, and like kind of as an ally, how can they create that space for someone who is neurodiverse to like have those candid conversations. And you kind of did speak on it, where the accountability part and, you know, meeting that with empathy. But is there anything maybe someone could do proactively to make sure that that neurodiverse individual knows that it's a safe environment or a safe conversation, meeting, etc.?
I think the first thing that organizations and people should do to articulate that is to make sure that you are using universal design, that I love to talk about, in your organization. So an example of universal design would be having a quiet space in your workplace if someone is feeling overwhelmed. A place that they can go to recoup. In doing that, that really has nothing to do with masking. It will help someone mask if they have a quiet spot where they can go to recharge. But it's letting them know, I'm aware that these are issues. We have a low sensory environment for you that you can go to. That's really important. At our workplace, my office is anyone can come down, and then that my office instantly becomes a quiet spot. Mm-hmm. And I'm always willing to leave it, but you have to have that. Doing things like that articulate to the neurodiverse person that they're safe. The other piece is to share authentically about your experience. This isn't about not discussing it. So if you're having someone in your life who's neurodiverse, talking about your experience with them. So for example, it might be something like, hey, I notice when we talk about this topic, you tend to get really emotional. What can I do to make this less emotional for you? Mm-hmm. Or, you know what I've noticed? If we talk really late at night, I'm noticing, you know, a little bit of slipping in your mask. Should we maybe schedule our phone calls earlier in the night? It's doing those pieces to let them know, hey, I'm not mad at you about the late phone calls, but I don't want you to experience that. The other piece is listen. Something that happens to neurodiverse individuals and absolutely happens to me still, even in the role that I am, is people will deny that our behavior is tied to our diagnosis. So it's that idea of, you know, if I'm like, let's say I'm having a tense conversation with someone and I'm saying, I'm trying to communicate this to you and I'm struggling to communicate this. This is what I want to be understood. for the other person to take that extra effort and be like, okay, I'm not understanding you, but I want to understand you, and do that piece. The other piece that really needs to be dismantled that I see a lot of is that there's a lot of internalized ableism within our own community. Yeah. Just because, for example, one autistic person is really great at masking and their slips only happen at home when they're alone, that right. They are able to regulate in public all the time, doesn't mean another autistic person isn't trying as hard if they can't. There are different support needs across autism, and that might be an area that one person doesn't require a ton of support and another person does require support. Because remember, that's how we talk about autism and neurodiversity, not in a severity of symptoms, but in what is the level of support that person may need. For example, I have noticed some professional people who have ADHD, here's like a different layer of masking, have to write everything down and will repeat things back to you. And what they're really doing is they're masking their own working memory issues. And you don't want to say to someone, well, like, I don't need you to send me an email after each meeting. I remember what you said. Well, no, maybe the other person needs to send that email and that piece.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think to kind of close things out, I have kind of a broad question, but I guess if we, in a perfect world, if we want to build spaces where people don't have to mask, what would be your first step?
It starts with young children. It starts teaching children as young as they are that normal is a construct. And I know you're not going to say to a 3-year-old, normal is a construct, but what you're going to say is children will normally kind of socially regulate each other. And as adults, it's our job to say, no, that's okay. That's how this child is expressing themselves. Or if a child, especially a young child who's suffering with anything that's making it hard for them to regulate and they're having a meltdown, the way we as adults talk about that will carry a child for life. If we say that child is having a really difficult moment, and we say that to the other kids, this child is having a really difficult moment, they're going to go to a quiet space, I can't wait till we welcome them back. And then when that child comes and you explain to the children that we welcome the child back, that's a big piece. But if we start shaming that child or treating that child as if that is a behavioral issue, that's going to in fact, I was going to correct myself, but it is almost an infection. The other children to treat that child that way. If we start with children and we say that these things are acceptable, these are acceptable behaviors, that's going to really have a shift in children's behavior. For workplaces, it's universal design. Mm-hmm. Really doing that will have a big impact. And what I want everyone to do, because this is a really important thing, is to hear what people are saying and let go of how they're saying it. And let go of, I would have preferred you said it this way. The amount of times people in my life have said that to me when I'm trying to communicate my needs, my wants, my desires, to have someone come and say, I'm not against what you're saying, but I don't like how you said it, or I wish you had have said it this way, is so demoralizing. And the next time I talk with that person, I am definitely masking more. So if we want to create a world without it, we're going to start with the children, and as adults, we're going to use universal design to make people feel comfortable, and we're going to hear what people are trying to communicate and stop trying to regulate how people communicate and get their needs met.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the universal design has truly shifted how I kind of look at, working environments and everything like that. And I think looking back at my past, work experience working with children, I could see how, I kind of did see a little bit of both between other coworkers and stuff, of either kind of that, letting the child regulate themselves in a quiet area versus that kind of public shame within the group. And, you know, and I was working in a daycare, so these kids were young. So, and you could kind of, you know, see it back then too, because that's going back probably about 6 or 7 years now. So yeah, definitely, you know, rethinking kind of my previous work environments and how, you know, we can change that going forward. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again for all of your input. I think these conversations are super important, not only for neurodiverse people, but for the allies, how you were saying before, because I really think those who are listening to the podcast, this can really shift, you know, the way that you think, maybe the way that you kind of react to specific conversations and whatnot. But yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for always sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you, Jordan, for helping frame the conversation and asking such great questions.
Thank you for listening to the Neurodiverse Lens, a CDL podcast. For more information, visit diverselearners.ca.